Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome back. Another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I am your host, Bill Kelly. It's good to have you with us today. We continue along the same theme of the Canadian election, which is coming up, of course, on April the 28th. We talked at length about Pierre Poilievre and some of the concerns, the good, the bad, and frankly, a lot of the ugly about Mr. Poilievre and the concerns I think many Canadians, according to the numbers, probably most Canadians feel about the possibility of Poilievre as a leader of this country and the shortcomings that may result. We did promise we were going to talk about Mark Carney, the Liberal leader, as we draw closer to this. And we've got a number of things I want to talk about here, too. But as always, as I've mentioned in the podcast, I'm always appreciative of some of the feedback and the questions that are asked from you, the listeners and the viewers of the podcast. It's all part of this whole idea about keeping the dialogue going and trying to inform each other about exactly what is happening and why, so that we're better prepared when we finally go to cast that vote on the 28th, or sooner, of course, if you're going to one of the advanced polls. The concerns about the Conservative Party, and I've made some comments over the last couple of weeks about my distaste for an awful lot of what's going on in the Conservative movement, and I have to couch this in perspective, because it wasn't always that way. When my dear friend, the late Lincoln Alexander, was talking to me about his political history, and those that may not know, of course, he was the first black MP from Hamilton West, elected there, and he became a Conservative. And I asked him one time, I said, why? Why that party? And he said, basically, because my law partner in the firm that he was in at the time was a Conservative, and he's the one that convinced him to run as a Conservative. He's progressive Conservative, by the way, and that's a key word. He says, if the guy had been a Liberal, I probably would have run as a Liberal. Not that there weren't differences between the progressive Conservatives and the Liberals. There were many, many differences. As evidenced by the John Diefenbaker versus Lester Pearson debates that went on time and time again, Bob Stanfield and Pierre Trudeau. But there were some commonalities, too, and probably a shared value of trying to move Canada forward. That seemed to change over the years for the Conservative Party and probably culminated in the amalgamation of the Conservatives who had been wiped out in a previous election when Jean Chrétien won a huge majority. The Conservatives decided to amalgamate with the Reform Party and form one party, and they became the Conservative Party. It's interesting to note that they dropped the word progressive when they decided to become the Conservative Party. And some would argue, and I think I agree with it, that they didn't just drop the word progressive, they dropped the concept of being progressive, some calling them the regressive Conservative Party, because they seem to have changed their attitude about Canada's future and I think the responsibility of elected officials. But that's probably a topic that we're going to get into in greater detail a little bit later on. But because things have happened that I think have turned a lot of people off who might have even leaned towards conservative values. Two of the elements, as I talk to people, just voters and people in the political world, and people in my realm, of course, as commentators and talk show hosts, a couple of things that really bothered. And one, of course, was in the Harper government, the barbaric practice of snitch line that was introduced and advocated for, not by Harper alone, but by other members, including Poilievre, by the way, and others, Kelly Leach. Basically a snitch line to say that if, there's something going on that you don't like about one of the new Canadians or a new family of Canadians, here's the number to call to snitch on them and sick the authorities on them. I found that, and I think many Canadians, I think most Canadians, found that to be a disgusting concept about turning Canadians against Canadians and basically offering a platform for people with biases and racial hatred towards certain ethnic groups to be able to use that. It didn't go very far, thank God, but that was the concern. Another one was, of course, and again, it was in the latter days, of course, of the Harper government, was the concern about residential schools. And the discovery about possible burial sites, which also spawned a conversation about what was going on at those residential schools, about the mistreatment and about the whole mindset and about the whole idea of basically taking Aboriginal, Indigenous children who had lived here for generations, who had their own lifestyles, who had their own beliefs, religious beliefs too, and basically being forced to and indoctrinated into the quote-unquote Christian lifestyle. That, I think, and I think rightly so, angered an awful lot of Canadians. But I think one of the comments from Mr. Poilievre, who was a member of the Harper cabinet at the time, stated that I think turned an awful lot of people, not just about Poilievre himself, but about the governments and their attitude. Because the Harper government and Prime Minister Harper himself seemed to be making inroads to try to find what was going on and to talk about reparation and apologies towards Aboriginals for the residential school. And Mr. Poilievre, and I'll paraphrase this, basically went on record in a press conference and simply said, look, Indigenous people should stop putting their hand out and looking for government money and just learn the value of a good day's work. Now, I'm told that comment basically resulted in Mr. Poilievre being dragged under the carpet to the Prime Minister's office, and Mr. Harper telling him to just basically keep your mouth shut. But that's that mindset and that attitude that I think bothered an awful lot of Canadians. So that's kind of where we're standing with people's ideas about the party and their concerns about this. Now, we take that and talk about the other side, of course, the Liberal Party, and a lot of the, I think, considerations that people have and maybe some of the false ideas people have about the Liberals and the Conservatives are coming to fore now during this particular election race. One, of course, being that Mark Carney is simply a shill for Justin Trudeau, and a Liberal that was just kind of waiting in the weeds. Let's talk about that for just a couple of seconds. Mark Carney really came to public attention, I guess, when he was appointed as the Bank of Canada governor. And we should mention that he was appointed to the Bank of Canada governorship by Stephen Harper, by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, a Conservative. All right? So, do you really and truly, just think about this for a second now, even hardcore Conservatives, do you really and truly think that Stephen Harper, with his tunnel vision and hatred for Liberals, that would have appointed somebody that he knew to be a Liberal as the governor of the Bank of Canada? Come on, give your head a shake. Of course not. And the reason why is because Mark Carney was apolitical. He had a great resume and a very impressive CV about his not just academic accomplishments, but his work within the field of finance. And he was appointed as the governor of the Bank of Canada. And we've all seen, and if you haven't, just go on YouTube. When Carney left that particular job, the words of praise that Stephen Harper had for Mark Carney and the work that he did in the Bank of Canada, especially during the recessions of 08 and 09. Very, very, very effusive in his praise for what Carney did and his contributions, as did Jim Flaherty, who was the finance minister at the time. Very effusive in his comments and his support and his praise for the work Carney did. That's why I find it somewhat disingenuous that Mr. Harper and some others are now simply saying, well, it wasn't that big of an accomplishment. Baloney. It was, and they know it at the time. But the problem is now that he's running as a Liberal, they have to try to discredit them, which I think is well, pretty shallow, quite frankly, but that's the way things go. As a matter of fact, even then, and Mr. Carney, of course, went over and by the way, he was recruited to be the governor of the Bank of England. He didn't apply for that job, but the Conservative government, again, a Conservative government under David Cameron, basically begged him to take the job. The Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, also a Conservative, the one who hired him, said that we had to go, and we basically had to go after Mr. Carney and convince him to take the job because of their precarious financial position over in the UK at the time. And no sooner had he taken the job, of course, than the you-know-what hit the fan with the Brexit decision and the turmoil that caused, and that was something that got thrown onto Carney's plate. And again, he did a masterful job of steering the UK through those financial hard times, much to the chagrin of a couple of people that have come to the fore that the right-wing Conservative pundits and columnists have tried to dig up and say, see, he was terrible at the job. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. So let's deal with facts as opposed to the fiction that's going on here. Carney was apolitical. As a matter of fact, another story that has come up, and I think this bears repeating as well, is that when Jim Flaherty and Stephen Harper had a falling out for whatever reason, and Flaherty had left the post as finance minister, the story that we have heard is that Stephen Harper actually offered the job of finance minister to Mark Carney, who was finished with the Bank of Canada at the time, and he declined. Now, Harper has again subsequently said, no, that didn't really happen. But this is the same guy that tried to walk back his comments about how great a job Carney had been doing at the time. So take that with a grain of salt. But again, apolitical. He did not declare himself to be a Conservative or a Liberal. He was just very good at his job. Even just short time after that, when the Liberals decided on a leadership race that was eventually run by Justin Trudeau, an awful lot of Liberals that I talked to at the time were trying to get Carney to run as the Liberal leader. This is going back quite a few years now, to 2013, I think it was. And he declined. He says, no. He says, I'm not any political affiliation. I'm just here to do my job. So he declined at that time. Subsequently, now since he has moved to the fore, an awful lot of stuff has been, frankly, manufactured to try to say that, well, he was just a shill and he was a constant advisor to Justin Trudeau. That's not the case at all. He may have, and we're told that he probably did, offer some advice about some of the Trudeau policies when it came to COVID and CERB and some of those things. But he was not on the payroll. He wasn't developing policy or anything like that. Hey, you get a phone call from the Prime Minister, say, hey, what do you think about this idea? What are you going to tell him? To go to hell? You're going to talk and at least give your advice on that. And that's about as far as it went. It wasn't until recently, of course, that Carney decided that he did have political ambitions. And basically, as he's indicated, he chose the Liberals because they seem to be more aligned with his values. Let's face it, the Conservatives, as we've talked about in this podcast and previous podcasts, have gone through quite a metamorphosis and a very hard swing to the right, not just on economic issues, but on social issues as well, which I assume would make a gentleman like Carney very uncomfortable. So he is running as a Liberal, and now as Prime Minister, of course, looking for re-election, as it turns out. He is not an elitist. He was born in the Northwest Territories, grew up in Edmonton, conservative country, of course, in Alberta. Yes, he has a very impressive academic record, something that he attained through hard work. Yes, through Canadian universities, through Harvard, and of course over at Oxford, where he got his PhD. Then, of course, you saw the accusation a couple of weeks ago that, oh yeah, but he plagiarized. Well, that was a load of crock. That just didn't seem to happen here. And of course, it's been downplayed and basically denied by a number of people. The review board at Oxford University that looked over his thesis and said it's a lie. It's just totally not true. And again, manufactured stuff to try to discredit Mr. Carney. But that's the sort of thing that we as voters are inundated with, and we have to sift through it. Now, there are going to be those who are simply going to say, well, I hate Liberals and I hate Carney, so I'm going to believe anything bad that's being written and said about him. And that's easy to do these days because, as we've talked about, and the numbers don't lie, we tend, when we're surfing through internet stories and social media, to gravitate towards stories that basically substantiate what we already think. We're not looking for new information. We're not looking to broaden our horizons. We're already thinking, I hate that guy. I'm going to read all kinds of stories that say, yeah, he's a lousy guy, because that makes me feel better about my hatred for them. And that's sadly a reality that we have to face these days. But we have to try to be better than that, and have to at least open our minds that that stuff is manufactured and basically put there to try to discredit people, which is sadly the way politics seem to run these days. Carney's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm sure that if he is successful, there's some stuff that he's going to introduce and try to introduce and indicate that is going to be in the best interest that needs to be debated and maybe modified. And that's what happens with leadership. But you're looking for somebody who has a plan, who knows how to implement that plan, but at the same time has the ability to be able to pivot and to be able to modify or change direction or tweak a certain policy depending on the situation. Our financial situation, anything else that's going on, is not going to stay the same forever. And you need leadership that's going to be able to, first of all, anticipate that if they can, and second of all, modify and develop policies to try to move forward and to move Canadians forward. He's not appealing just to the rich. He's not like the guy south of the border who's simply going to give tax cuts to the filthy millionaires and billionaires down there. The basis and the backbone of what we're hearing from Carney with his financial and his budgetary ideas is a middle-class tax cut, which, by the way, he's been advocating for quite some time. And those that don't know that, read his book, okay? Instead of listening to some of the trash that you're seeing on social media, the book he wrote a number of years ago, it's called Values, Building a Better World for All, basically encapsulates an awful lot of what he's talking about during this campaign. These are not new ideas. They're not ideas that he's stealing from somebody else. They're ideas that he has felt are in the best interests of this country. And of course, not only then, but now, to try to move this country forward. Because I guess the strongest argument for Carney, and one of the reasons why I feel he's the best choice to be the prime minister here, is been there, done that. In other words, he's been there when the shit hit the fan in this country, and certainly when it did in the UK, and he stick-handled through that, if I can use a hockey metaphor since he's a former hockey player. Not single-handedly, and he's never said it was single-handedly, but you've got to have somebody who's got their hand on the till and knows which direction to take us, and he's done that successfully in a couple of different occasions in two different countries, as opposed to the lack of experience, as in no experience, in dealing with these sorts of issues and showing any leadership qualities at all. Those are the sorts of things that we need to keep in mind as we go forward. And there's going to be a lot more disinformation, of course, coming out on the social safety net and others about Carney and about others. And we need to be diligent, and we need to do our homework on this and make up our minds. Frankly, what I'm hearing from an awful lot of Canadians, especially when you look at some of the numbers here and people that had been traditional voters of another party, a lot of Canadians, I think, are adopting a new attitude, which I think is very healthy, basically saying, I don't give a damn what political party the person's from. I want the best possible choice to be the leader of this country. And if it happens to be that political party and I haven't voted for them before, so what? The country will be better for it, and will be better for it if we have the right people in charge. And that's the sort of attitude, the healthy attitude, I think that we need to have going forward on here. And the other element, I know we're just about out of time in this particular segment, is a cautionary tale. And it's something that I've talked about almost every time we have an election, whether it's municipal, provincial, federal, whatever the case might be. Don't be fooled by polls. I know that there seems to be a real swing, and it's educational, and it's, I think, instructive to look at those numbers and what's going on and the mood of the Canadians. But the election is April the 28th. A lot can happen. And the worst thing that can possibly happen, and politicians and some failed politicians can certainly talk us about this, is don't take it for granted. Don't think, oh, this one's over. Everybody's made up their mind. I don't need to vote. Or, hey, I don't need to vote. I was going to vote for those people, but they don't need my vote. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I can count on 10 hands and everybody else's hands the number of times that politicians count on votes and they don't get the vote out because people think, well, the race is over. And we can have some disastrous results if that sort of attitude is prevalent. So keep what's going on. Be diligent. Do your homework and make sure that you vote, and make sure that you tell your family and friends to vote as well. The fate of this country basically depends on what we do in this particular election. That's not overstating things. The world situation and the Canadian situation here are rather tenuous right now. This is where we need strong leadership. Not cliches, not somebody who's just going to be pontificating without any sorts of an idea as to how to get things done. We got to get somebody who knows what they're doing. And that's the decision Canadians are going to have to make. That is it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. You can catch us, if you're new, Substack, Spotify, Apple, and, of course, on YouTube, Blue Sky, so many different platforms for you to do this. And we'll come up with a number of these things as we move forward. And there's so many things that are intertwined right now. The Canadian political situation, certainly the global situation, everything seems to be influenced by what's happening south of the border, too. And we'll talk about it in future podcasts. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wissenz Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wissenz Law, 905-522-1102 or wissenslaw.com.